I'm a writer. I know dialogue.
That's a fountain of conversation, man. That's a geyser.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yes, provocative.
Welcome to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Subscribe and give the podcast a 5-star review wherever you listen. The website is bookedonrock.com. It's another edition of The Dialogue, a chill and chat with authors, fellow podcasters, listeners, and more. This week's guests are Steve Roth and Darren Paltrowitz, hosts of the DLRcast, a podcast devoted to all things David Lee Roth. Steve and Darren are on the show to talk about their favorite bands, including, of course, Van Halen, Kiss, Cheap Trick, books on rock they've read, want to read, want to see written, and Darren has a book he's working on right now that will interest Van Halen fans and David Lee Roth fans. Steve Roth is the senior marketing manager for the book publishing company The Quarto Group. He's worked for Sony Music, MCA Records, Universal Music Group, and Interscope Records. Darren is a New York resident and licensed private investigator with over 20 years of entertainment industry experience. He's the host of the weekly Paltrowcast with Darren Paltrowitz series, which airs on 50-plus television stations weekly, plus key podcast and digital networks. His third book is slated for a 2023 release via Backbeat Books, and we'll talk about that in this episode. So let's get to it. Here are Steve Roth and Darren Paltrowitz. Steve and Darren, my God, it's great to have you on the podcast. What's going on, guys?
You know.
What's up, Eric? I've been looking forward to this, man. Good to see you and speak to you again.
I owe you this. You guys had me on your podcast.
Yeah, you're a fellow empathizer, sympathizer within the Van Halen universe.
That's right.
Sufferer.
And we have to thank you for giving us a lot of coverage on Van Halen News Desk. So thank you for fighting the good fight, Eric.
Cool, man. No, that was great. It popped up. You know how podcasts, they just pop up out of nowhere. You're like, oh, there's a podcast on Dave? Okay, I'm in. And it's hosted by a guy whose last name is Roth.
I have to ask you about that real quick, Eric. Taking you off topic here. I didn't know there's a Sammy Hagar podcast.
Brand new.
That launched after us, and they're aware of us. Do they hate us? Any idea?
No. Those guys sound like two great guys. I am sure they don't hate you. They just launched the Bogus Otis podcast, which is, Bogus Otis is an inside thing with Sammy fans. They know what that's about. It's like a tattoo that he had. And did you guys know that? The reference to Bogus? Okay. But yeah, they now have a Sammy podcast. So I think there's a celebrity death match here, between you.
It always was like pro wrestling with Sammy and Dave. So why not make it like the podcast?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your podcast. Let's talk about yours, the DLRcast. You just reached the 75 episode mark, launched in June of 2020. How did you guys meet, and what led to you teaming up for this podcast?
In my day job, I pitched Darren all sorts of various books and stuff, and we kind of became friends via online and started chatting about this stuff and have a mutual like of all things Dave and all things Van Halen. And before he told me his that how much he likes Sonrisa Salvaje, we're talking all things Dave, and I just went, this conversation could be a podcast. And next thing you know, we're going back and forth on possible topics and names. And it's like, well, fuck, let's do this.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. And Darren, you're out of the Long Island area, right? And Steve, you're in Minneapolis.
Correct.
But Steve used to be from here. He doesn't like to admit it, but
I am more or less a native, a bit farther east than Darren. So
there is that chemistry between the two of you guys where you're bouncing off of each other. You got a good back and forth. Do you guys feel that? And when did you start to feel that chemistry start to kick in?
For me, it's a unique dynamic in that Steve is as nice of a human being on air as he is off air. No one can have a beef with Steve. For me, it all kind of depends on what day it is, how I'm feeling, if I'm going to be antagonistic, if I'm going to love Dave today, hate Dave today. And Steve is very patient throughout all of it. So some episodes are better than others. And Steve is very patient to tolerate which mood is Darren going to be in with Van Halen.
It's funny. I would never say that. I mean, here's the thing. I genuinely love talking to Darren. I mean, it's about any variety of topics because we do have a lot in common. So I always felt from the beginning the conversation has kind of flowed, and I just love the creativity of doing the podcast and having fun with it. But it really comes down to the fact that I really enjoy talking to him. I mean, this is sort of thing where it's just easy.
I love because Steve will get to the point where you're looking at the sunny side of Dave and your situations that are going on, and you'll say something like, you know what, I'm going to give Dave the benefit of the doubt here on this, and I just don't think that's the case. And then Darren will come in because you have your private investigator background, so you have this. You have this like, I don't think so. I think there's more to this than we know. So you take Steve down the rabbit hole, and eventually it just gets to the point where Steve's like, I don't know. You know what? I don't know. And that's when that's it.
It's real. It's not like a professional wrestling kind of thing where, the two people are backstage going, okay, so I'm going to throw you into the corner. It's not like that. It's just Steve would like to pull the curtain back. He'll say something like, okay, what are we going to talk about in this episode? And I said, let's just save it for the air.
Save it for the air.
Save it for the air. Because I have such a bad attention span. I can't do anything twice for the most
same
part.
Here. Here's the funny thing though. I never knew until we got into this that Darren was a private investigator.
Yeah,
so the crazy thing is that lends itself so well to such a secretive, crazy camp that is all things Van Halen and Dave. And I would venture to guess we're the only podcast by and for fans of David Lee Roth with a private investigator as a co-host. So I mean,
I would say that
there's a niche there that I don't think anybody can come close that anybody can match. So, but it's in truth though. I mean, what Van Halen's like. I mean, it's like dealing with the CIA, right? And Darren will just, okay, this isn't an NDA, but I heard, and I know it's not bullshit.
Yeah.
I know it's not bullshit. It's not rumors and speculation.
That's what makes you a great investigative reporter, Darren, is that you have that mind. You're always looking to find out more. There's always more to a story.
You flatter, and I appreciate that. And I mentioned before we started recording, I was in Mexico last week, and two related Dave things, if I can add. Okay, number one.
Were you on vacation while you're doing this, or is this work related?
A little bit of both. It was a press trip, like where they fly you down to an area in exchange for coverage.
All right, but you're always on your radar is always looking for DLR news wherever you are.
Yes. And I was with somebody who's on the tourism board of Cabo St. Lucas, and he had no idea that Roth was there in May. And this is a person who's been there in Cabo since 92. And Van Halen went there first in 88, 89 before opening up Cabo Wabo in 89, 90.
Around there, yep.
So this is a person who knows everything, and he didn't have any inkling of that going on. Second thing is, not one person I spoke to knew about Sonrisa Salvaje. I mean, can you believe that?
Yes, I know. The well, I have to, because there may be one or two people listening who don't know what that is. That's the Spanish version of David Lee Roth's Even Smile. We have to explain. You were the only place that I heard that Dave was performing in May. Like nobody knew where he was, and how did you find out that he was performing there? It was a birthday gig, wasn't it, for somebody? A celebrity? Yeah,
the really quick, non-incriminating. Actually, this is a partially incriminating story. Eric, we'll just say allegedly.
Yeah.
We'll just say allegedly like 5 times, okay? Because allegedly this information came out. Correct? Allegedly it did.
Okay.
Okay, so I was interviewing the poker brat, Phil Hellmuth, and it was a really positive interview that he was introduced to me through an energy drink company. And they said, do you want to talk to him? I'm like, sure. And do you want some free product? Of course. So I'm talking to him, and he's talking about all these great things that he does in life. And he said at one point, and my friend had his 50th birthday in Mexico, and he had Coolio and Cardi B and all these musicians performing there. And I went, did David Lee Roth perform at that event? This guy who has a renowned poker face, who obviously wins poker tournaments, he suddenly couldn't hide anything, and he would go, I don't want to say. It's really not a place to say. And so then I spent like the next 5-6 hours that day trying to figure out, okay, Cardi B, what days was she in Cabo? And there was paparazzi shots from like May 30 or May 31st. And then there was like her hairstylist tagged it around that. And then I Googled and Googled and Googled, and then figured it was a tech company founder's 50th birthday party who everyone had to sign an NDA to go to.
I just love that as soon as somebody says there was a concert for somebody's birthday, you just ask, was David Lee Roth there?
He said Mexico. He said a birthday party, and Roth gave that away. Had Roth not been spotted at LAX, where he said he played at somebody's birthday party.
That's right. That tipped you to it. Yeah.
Loved them in high school or something like that. So you do the math and you say if the person was like 17 in 1984, you do the math. Coincidentally, that energy drink company is why the world knows that David Lee Roth played a 50th birthday party.
And that might be the last time Coolio performed, right? Passed away.
Yeah, that's one of them. And I interviewed Coolio a couple months before he passed. And
did you? Wow.
Nice guy, surprisingly.
And Darren, you're working on a David Lee Roth book right now. What can you tell us about that? How much can you tell us about it?
Whatever I tell you is probably going to change, because I heard a rumor. It's not a 2023 book. I heard it's a 2024 book.
Really?
Yes. So I have a feeling that whatever I've written is just going to change, like whether it's the news or rewrites or whatever. But I like what's written. I just have no idea how much is going to make the final cut.
Well, here's what we all want to know. Is Dave the Dave that we see on stage all the time off stage? Does he have an off switch? And most people you talk to say, no, he is. That's the way he is, with the exception of a few little things here and there. Like sometimes people say he's nicer than you would think. He was a cool guy. He was pretty gracious. Or like Ray Luzier said, you mess up on stage, he's going to let you know. He gets pretty pissed. But for the most part, he is that. That's who he is.
Usually that's how he is. But one of the people that I interviewed for the book basically said, in spending a lot of time with Dave one-on-one, that Dave one-on-one is a real Dave. He's a real guy. The second the third person comes into the room, Diamond Dave has arrived.
Ah.
You know what I was just thinking of? And it's funny you mentioned that, Darren, because do you remember a few years back, now a while ago, several years back now, when Van Halen was coming back from an Australia show and those pictures showed up with him and Sebastian Bach?
Yeah.
They were
back from
Australia, and they were sitting together, and the post was basically like, I had a great time just chatting with Dave and hanging out. He's hilarious, blah, blah. And now that with you just talking that, I can't imagine Dave just being, wow, and out of his mind, or just so outlandish on your basic flight where he's wearing reading glasses, just hanging out. I mean, we know how very well read he is. My thing I wonder too, is that as he ages, like we all are, I mean, is it harder for him to stay focused? Or, I mean, Darren and I keep going back to this, the Mark Maron interview and the Rogan interview. Mm-hmm. I mean, those were kind of tough to follow
all over.
And
the
it's
map.
like, is that an act? Or because he just seemed more coherent and Darren, I mean, you interviewed him when you were a wee lad practically, and you were able to make some sense of what he was talking about back then.
That was late 90s, right there?
That was 2003.
Okay, early 2000s.
Spring 2003. I go back and forth on this, Steve, all the time. And allegedly, I've heard that you can't deal with him. Lately, he's in permanent craze mode. I don't know if the pandemic changed things a little bit, but I'm not hearing oh, I saw Dave and he gave me his jacket. Like those kinds of stories you'd hear all the time. I saw Dave and I told him I love his music and he bought all my drinks, and then he invited me over to his place and he gave me a microphone. you hear those stories. I have not heard any of those in a few years. I've been hearing kind of terrifying, like, he's not with it, he's been in his bubble too long things. And I hope that's wrong, and I hope that's hearsay.
Well, I threw out some questions to you guys ahead of the show. I wanted to know about books you've read, that you're fans of, that you'd like to see written. And Darren, you wanted to talk about a book you just reread, which is Dave's 1997 autobiography, Crazy from the Heat. So I'll start with you, and then Steve, you can jump in. I'm interested in getting your thoughts as well on this book. For you, Darren, though, having read it 25 years later with all of the events that have transpired since, like, we're talking, Dave tried working with Eddie again in 99, but it didn't happen. He rejoins in 07. 2012 is a different kind of truth, all that stuff. So what did you think while reading it all these years later?
The first time I read it's because I was just a huge fan. And this time I read it because I wanted to do some research for my book, see what he said about some people, see how he reflected on certain things. Because what I kind of realized in putting together the book was there's three different elements to it all. It's how Dave felt at the time, there's how Dave felt about it a couple of years later, and then there's how Dave felt about it 20 to 30 years later. And he changes the facts a lot about a lot of things. But the most dumbfounding thing to me in this book is the Eat 'em and Smile band. I think he talks about for 2 pages total. So here we are. Steve and I would not have this podcast and this friendship and all that if it weren't for Eat 'em and Smile. And to Dave, he go like, it doesn't matter to him? What? How were there more pages about cottage cheese in Italy than...
Yeah, because he put everything into that album and tour because he knew what was on the line. It's either this succeeds and I'm going to move forward as a solo artist, or it is not, and I'm in big trouble.
Yeah,
so he got in great shape for that tour.
Oh yeah,
he brought in the best of the best. But yeah, it's surprising he didn't really get into that.
That drove me crazy about the book too, and that's one of the things that Darren and I first started the podcast was we always thought that his solo music has been kind of underappreciated. Granted, he hasn't done a lot of it when you think of it, as far as his output, right? The last 20 years, especially 25 years, although we know from what we've heard, there's tons of stuff out there that's never been, he records all the time, that's never been released. And then to go back to the book and to get virtually nothing about, I shouldn't say virtually nothing, but so little about his solo stuff, the music stuff. Every opportunity he's had to promote, it seems, his solo output, even sometimes when he was, especially on tour, it's always been, and I get it, it's always going to be about Van Halen, but it's like, you've got this whole chapter in your life. You were out of Van Halen as many years as you were in Van Halen, if not more. Yeah. I mean, and there was some really good stuff there, and you're still a creative, you're still a creative force privately, or what we've seen outwardly, non-musical stuff. And so it always drives me crazy when, especially in the book, where it just got such short shrift.
Yeah, like what was going through his mind? How did it feel to succeed with that album and that tour? Did he feel vindication? What was going through his mind? What were his emotions at the time?
It's pretty amazing. And we've talked about this before, how fast that came together. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was like, I'm out. I got it. The movie thing fell apart and I got to go. And he put this together, this amazing band. And I think that they wrote the stuff, rehearsed it, recorded it within barely 6 months, right? If the time, I mean, it was really fast. It wasn't, and he took the challenge and ran with it. And to my mind, won it.
Yeah, and Steve, you say Greg Renoff's 2015 book, Van Halen Rising, How a Southern California Backyard Party Band Saved Heavy Metal, is one of your picks for favorite reads. The research that Greg does on that book is just phenomenal.
Yeah, and it really opened up. I mean, we always heard about the backyard parties, but if you're a Van Halen fan, you know about it. But the fact that there was so much detail about those things, you really felt like you could feel yourself what those were like, and those were back there. I mean, and how they went off and how they put it all together, and just the hustle that band did. They worked their asses off. And I say this all the time, and there was no better place time-wise or geographically for this to happen, but I say this all the time. I can't think of, there's no other band that came up and exploded that way before they were hitting clubs. I mean, they never even got out of Northern California at one point, past Northern California, and they're exploding, and they get signed on the basis of backyard parties. Think of that. Who else
Crazy.
can you think of that happened?
Yeah, this wasn't
Where
like
that
20,
happened.
30 friends hanging out in somebody's backyard. It was a
They
mini
were massive.
concert.
Yeah. And Renoff is just a really good writer. And again, so well researched. I mean, just so much I learned from that book. It's so in depth.
Yeah, over 50 policemen showed up in riot gear, a helicopter over the house. This was in 1974. Required a helicopter and 50 to 60 policemen in riot gear to finally break things up. The party organizer cut the power to the stage under police orders several times, only to have Alex Van Halen storm in and continually turn everything back on. In the melee of approaching police and stoned partygoers attempting to escape, someone tripped and severed a water supply line to the pool. Water began cascading across the patio toward the stage and the band's electrical equipment. A quick-thinking friend grabbed a push broom to try and keep the water at bay and prevent possible electrocution. And that's just one example of how wild and out of control Van Halen parties were and why their legend remains. Yeah.
Such detail, so mind-blowing. The fact that he talked to people who were at those parties.
Yeah.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Darren Paltrowitz, Steve Roth, host of the DLRcast, which you can hear wherever you get your podcasts. And Darren, also the host of the Paltrowcast, available on YouTube, all your favorite podcast platforms, right?
I think so. I don't know what your favorite podcast platform.
Well, yeah.
Hopefully it's
Yeah.
one of them.
By the way, Darren, your theme song is so goddamn catchy.
It's the Paltrowcast now with Darren Paltrowitz.
Kids.
Oh, thank you. Well, all credit on that goes to Steve Schultz, the singer of the band Longwave, where I once asked him, because he's become a good friend, hey, you got any leftover music that I could use a theme? And he gave me this instrumental. My wife heard it and she started jokingly saying my name over it.
Oh, that's great. That's how you got the lyrics.
And then, hey, Steve, can you add lyrics and vocals? Yeah, what do you want it to say? So he actually cut a couple of other alternate versions of that as well. And one of them goes on my unboxing video series that's on YouTube. So Steve Schultz is just so talented.
Steve, you listed some books that you're a fan of that are interesting. One I didn't know about and need to check out is Hitless Wonder, A Life in Minor League Rock and Roll by Joe Ostrich. Is that pronouncing it right? It's all about the most amazing power pop / rock band most people haven't heard, Watershed. Joe is the bassist in the band. This is a band from Columbus, Ohio, who is on the verge of stardom in the mid-90s. What happened?
Well, I'll tell you, I first found out about them when I worked for Sony. They put out an EP and an album called Twister, and I'm a huge power pop fan and hard rock. And to me, they were, and they still are. They still kind of gig, and I hope that book is still in print. I didn't check, but they had an EP I absolutely fell in love with, and then they put out the album, and they weren't a priority. And I got to know those guys. I learned a very valuable lesson in my time in the record business. That is, don't get too emotionally close to a band, because when it goes bad, and it will go bad, you're going to be crushed. And when they weren't a priority, we try to make it a priority just out of our Midwest offices here, and especially being such a great place for power pop. And I can remember an Epic Rec saying, I got the Watershed on whatever the big rock station was in Chicago. And it was like, you got to take them off. We need space for Pearl Jam. And I can tell you, they used to crash in my house. They got the phone call. They got dropped at my friend's house, and it was just heartbreaking. But their music is incredible. It keeps getting better and better. And Joe's a really good writer. He went on to become an English professor, I think, at a university in South Carolina, North Carolina. And the book is such a great inside look. I mean, these guys formed the band when they were like 15 years old in their basements, and they gigged relentlessly, constantly. And they just, if there wasn't for bad luck, Watershed sometimes would have no luck. And they just got on these very bizarre bills. They opened up, they're a 3-piece power pop band that's a cross between, I'd say, Cheap Trick and Georgia Satellites and a bunch of bands like that. And they were opening for Insane Clown Posse for a while and survived it. And were hit with Faygo soda every single night. The stories are great. And it's just a really good read, but on a personal level, because I know those guys and they're just absolutely the nicest guys in the world. And also just they're some of their albums are some of my favorite power pop albums. And I think they deserve to be heard, but that book certainly deserves to be read. It's a great story of coming, just it not happening and all the stories behind that and why it did it and what happened.
I think you can still get it. I found it on Amazon. Yeah, contract with Epic Records, studio date with Jim Steinman.
Yeah.
Meatloaf fame, right? And the Spin Doctors manager was their manager.
Oh, David Sonnenfeld?
No, it was their he was the, if not manager, their A&R guy, the now deceased was it Frankie LaRocca? I think his name was. He was
Really?
And forgive me if I got that wrong. It's not in arm's reach, but he was an A&R guy with Epic, and Epic had signed the Spin Doctors, and he worked a bunch of bands for them, and it's a great book.
A few other books you say you're a fan of, Steve. Kiss Behind the Mask, the official authorized biography by David Leaf and Ken Sharp. And This Band Has No Past, How Cheap Trick Became Cheap Trick, an amazing new book by Brian J. Cramp. You're not only a huge fan of Cheap Trick, Steve, you play a role in the book getting published. And Brian has thanked you in podcasts he's been on, including this one. He mentions your name, and I just heard him again. He was on Pat.
Pat Francis. Yeah.
He was on there. And again, Steve Roth. He says, Steve Roth, what role did you play in this? What's your involvement in this? Because you pushed to get it published.
If I remember correctly, so the company I work for, Cordo, used to up until June distribute Jawbone Press. It's kind of like an indie imprint, and almost like an indie label, small imprint out of the UK. And a couple of years ago, just through various Cheap Trick Facebook groups, I started chatting with this guy. I think he mentioned somewhere in a comment that he was writing a book and been researching and talked to Bunny Carlos and Ken Adamany, or talked to Ken Adamany. I was like, wow, hey, I work for a publisher. It's probably 3 or 4 years ago. And next thing you know, we started chatting. I said, I can't guarantee anything. Most of the time this doesn't happen, but get me 3 or 4 sample chapters and a table of contents. And I think this could have a home at Jawbone. And the thing is, when I started dealing with Jawbone in like 2012 and saw the books that they put out, like on Todd Rundgren and Glenn Hughes, and their catalog of books is amazing. I mean, it's really very eclectic, but very cool as well. I was bugging these guys all the time. You guys got to do a Cheap Trick book. I don't know if anybody's doing one, but you guys got to do a Cheap Trick book. And they listened to me. The unfortunate part of it was my involvement with it, more or less. I mean, I helped out afterwards, but we stopped distributing them. The book was supposed to come out in June. We stopped distributing at the end of June, and then it moved to September. So it's with a completely different company. But talk about well-researched. I mean,
oh man,
the stuff I learned about Rockford, Illinois and stuff. I mean, you have to be I thought I knew a lot about Cheap Trick and how they formed, and it's in-depth is an understatement.
Now, and then Jawbone they didn't require an agent, right? That was the one thing that set Jawbone apart from the other publishers, that they would be open to an author and check out what they've got, even if they didn't have
and it's basically a 2-person team there. Then they're just really nice guys. And again, I mean, it turns out when I first started working with them and I went back and looked at our catalog, I owned like 3 or 4 of their books, never even knew it was on Jawbone Press. So, I mean, I was familiar with what they were doing. And I want to mention, you mentioned that Kiss book, and that was really timely because I go back to that Kiss Behind the Mask, because I go back to that book routinely all the time, almost anytime I pull out a Kiss album, because it's a song by song commentary for each album from the band members in there. Yeah. So for reasons I don't exactly know why, I pulled out Hot in the Shade last week. And I was like, and I went back, and so sure enough, I do this every time. I've read that book about 3 or 4 times, but it's a great kind of a dip in book where it's like, all right, I forgot about this song on Unmasked. Yeah. Bam, I'll pull that out. And Ken Sharp and Leaf, I mean, Sharp especially, that guy's a Kiss savant and a good writer, and he's been around forever. And I think he wrote that book that was about, I'm forgetting the name of it, that was basically on Kiss's first 3 records a couple of years ago. I think it was Official. Nothing to Lose, I think it was called. I mean, I listen to several Kiss albums routinely, regularly. I mean, give it any month, I'm pulling out a Kiss record almost. And I go back to that book fairly regularly just to find these weird factoids and find out that, a lot of the stuff that you know already. But yeah, Ace didn't play on that song, or gee, I wrote the verse and so-and-so did the melody and Bruce came in with this. And I just love all that inside.
Same here, man.
Behind the curtain stuff. Yeah. There's never too many details for me. I mean, if Paul said, yeah, I remember getting 3 coffees to go at the place next door to the studio, I love any of those sorts of details. Minutia. It's ridiculous. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Love it too, man. Darren, did you have problems pushing
Yes.
your book? Like,
Oh,
oh, in general, you've had problems, but more specifically, your book. Did you have some challenges trying to pitch it? Because I know you did find a publisher, but were there
yeah.
a lot of doors shutting in your face? Like, nah, we're not interested.
Yeah, book publishing is this weird thing where if you get 99 no's but one yes, you were still successful. So I went down a list of literary agents, and only two were interested in working with me. And one of them I just found out was completely full of garbage. And the other one saw the pitch and went, wow, I could sell this if you do this, this, and this for a pitch. And I put that together, gave it to them, and they basically had an offer within 48 hours. So, after getting all these no from everyone and everything and going, I'm going to self-publish it, Lee Sobel just knew where to go, and that's Backbeat Books, because they like more niche-oriented things and biographies about entertainment greats. So that's how that happens, and you just have to find the one or two people who really get it and believe in it.
The timing is going to be so good for that, because there's a term we say in publishing that a topic or subject is underpublished. And up until the last 3 or 4 years, really, coincided with Eddie's death, there weren't a lot of Van Halen books, right? There was Lozauer's book or some cheaper history books and things like that. And now everybody's taking a second look at this stuff. And certainly for Dave, talk about underpublished. I mean, this guy is a total literary guy. He's got so much to say, but nobody's done a really good, proper book on him, to my knowledge, or to my mind.
Well, that leads me to books that we want to see written. And Darren, you say a memoir by bassist Michael Anthony would be great. Of all the things you would want Mike to open up about in the book, what would it be for you? What would be the one thing you really want to see him open up about if he were to write a book?
The Roth years in general, because let's face it, what do we know? I'm just spitballing here, but what do we know about Michael Anthony? Okay, he's a great singer. Okay, plays bass, cool with Sammy. He smiles a lot. And that's all we know. So the thing is, when Eddie slagged him for not being a great bass player, Michael never really spoke out about that. Or people said, well, Michael Anthony didn't play bass on X, Y, and Z. He never defended himself on that. When they say, oh, he didn't write any songs, again, he never came to his own defense publicly. And you don't know if it's just because he's a nice guy that takes the high road, or he just goes, they don't know. And I don't care. I'm happy. I love my family and life is good. You don't know which one that is. And I'm curious if a book like that which direction it would go in. What do you think?
Set the record straight.
Yeah.
Well, and I always wondered, like, does Mikey write music? Does he come up with songs? I always wondered, like, what other avenues has he or does he have interest in musically?
Seriously, how can you be that great of a singer and a solid bass player and tour the world in a rock band in a profession and not write music and not really have interest? So
right. Never formed his own band.
Yeah. I don't think we know the story on any level about how Michael, is it Sobolewski?
Sobolewski, yeah. That's his, yeah.
How he became Michael Anthony. Why did he change his name when the other people could have ethnic last names in Van Halen and he couldn't? And did he play on Van Halen 3 or not? What were the circumstances of him having to sign away hhis rights?
Oh, that in particular, he just got fucked. I mean, there's no two ways about that. I mean, and you're right. He took the high road, has always taken the high road and never has thrown any dirt or mud. And not that you'd expect him to or even want him to, but we want to know the facts, not about mudslinging or trying to give it back to anybody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He's not interested in a mudslinging book. He said that, but he doesn't have to do that.
And here's a guy who was there and worked his ass off with everyone else, was sober the entire time for the most part, right? No problems that we know of. And Darren brings up a good point. I mean, especially musically, does he write? I mean, I believe the words Michael Anthony's solo album might be uttered together for the very first time when I just said that.
Well, imagine how many musicians would be on board immediately. I need a singer. Yes. I need a guitar. What do you need, Mike? I'm there. How many people
Yeah.
love him in the business, right?
John
wouldn't be a
Five,
difficult.
everyone.
Yeah, that wouldn't be hard to do.
I can't remember who said this, and this is going to sound bad, but many, many, many years ago, I can't remember if I read it or somewhere I heard it, but somebody described Michael Anthony as being the luckiest rock and roller on the face of the earth.
Well,
Which, as far as place and time and being right there on when a comet was just blasting off, right?
yeah.
I mean,
There's other people.
clearly the talent kept him there.
Well, that's the thing. It's hard to swallow the luckiest, because that's almost like, it's almost intimating like that he just has no talent. He just is, hitching along for the ride, and he's part of the sound of Van Halen. But
I don't think that, but when you hear these things all about the behind the scenes and everything, and it's just, again, there's a lot of unanswered questions, which were started by Eddie, and who knows what sort of state or whatever. But
I was pissed. He got a fourth of the publishing, and Eddie was pissed. Why is he getting a fourth? He's not doing anything.
I would say Brian Bell from Weezer is more so in that category. Yes, he's a good guitar player, but he joined Weezer when they were already making their album for Geffen, and he didn't play on that first album. So he was just hanging out in New York.
Wow.
There. That's like a 30-year career right there. I think we could have a special podcast about the luckiest rockers ever and figure that one out.
Yeah, right.
It depends how you define luck also. I mean, I look at it as just being really right place and right time, because he wasn't the original bass player.
Right.
And did he even know I can't remember how he completely connected with them. But I mean, in a place full of so many musicians, it could have been somebody else kind of easily.
Yeah. Wasn't it that he lent them the chord or the part of the PA when he was in the band Snake at one of the backyard parties?
I think
the part that was blown out or needed, and then they went, "Oh yeah, that's the guy who sings." And then when they kicked out Mark Stone because he wasn't, quote, serious enough, even though he designed the Van Halen logo, that's questionable too. Well, that's another thing I'd love to find out in the book, like, what did he know about Mark Stone? Because unfortunately, not much got known about that guy.
Come on, Mike, put out a book. Yeah. And Steve, you also say you want to see a part 2 of David Lee's Crazy from the Heat, or as you write in your email, better yet, an actual serious, in-depth authorized biography of Dave, like Peter Ames Carlin's book on Bruce Springsteen called Bruce. Now that would be cool.
Yeah. I mean, just, again, I keep saying in depth,
which we may be getting from
right,
somebody
exactly.
who's in this Zoom room.
That's not a complete setup. It's just what I would absolutely love to see. And because
are
no one's done anything like that. Are you getting
a piece of Darren's profits? Is that what's going on? No,
okay. No.
What's 15% of zero?
We will promote it heavily on the DLRcast, of course. However, Darren will be a guest. We will be
and Darren, you have an open invite here for the record. You're welcome here.
Well, if I can weigh in for a second, there's parts of it that I went in depth on because I was able to get the records or get the people to go on record and speak about it. And then there's other stuff where everyone's either under an NDA or won't talk about it, or the person died. And since starting to write the book, like Brett Tuggle died, unfortunately, and Brett Tuggle knew a lot of stuff, and it's never really gone on record about all that. He talked a little bit in a Rolling Stone article from a year or two ago, but we've lost so many people that were important to the story. Noel Monk died, and nobody really knows that. Like, it didn't make newspaper headlines.
Yeah. It didn't make the Van Halen news desk. And I'm going to tell you, we weren't sure if it was even legit.
Yeah,
I mean, we didn't know because there was no official obituary.
And then when you go down the list, one of our listeners was trying to hook me up with Matt Sensio.
Now he was Dave's manager
through the radio show and reuniting with Van Halen. Pete Angelus won't talk. I know people who know him. He won't talk. There was Eddie Anderson won't talk.
That's
and then there was the manager
one.
Between Eddie Anderson and Matt Sensio, who sued Dave. And he told me he would talk, but then he kind of ghosted me. So there's 4 managers who won't talk, certain musicians who won't talk. So a lot of the Dave stories, just like piecing together, okay, what did like the majority of people say? And is it true?
You know, somebody emailed me about Eddie Anderson. He wanted to know if we ever had an interest or trying to reach out to Eddie to do a story on him. I think we did. This is long before I was writing for VHND. There is an article on Eddie Anderson there on the news desk, but he was Dave's bodyguard.
Bodyguard, travel companion, right? I mean, they would do all the
Yeah.
off-season craziness, hijinks, right?
Can you imagine the stories he has? Like
Oh.
he traveled with Dave to what? To the Amazon and did all that crazy
Yeah.
shit.
He
Man,
has photos. That Van Halen documentary about the early years of Van Halen, a lot of that footage or the videos is from Eddie Anderson. And it's because you look that Eddie Anderson at that time was promoting or managing a band. So I think he was looking at it as well, I'll do this, and in turn, the people will pay attention to the band. But that's the only Eddie Anderson thing I've seen him do publicly. He is on Facebook. Some of the photos of his are public and not private, but really, he's evolved.
the Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Well, you guys do host a podcast devoted to Dave, the DLRcast, but are you fans of Sammy? Are you fans of any of his solo work, his work with Van Halen?
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What
I mean,
what are you guys fans of the Sammy Van Halen years and his solo work?
Up for Breakfast is fantastic.
Are you're being facetious?
I put the cream in the coffee.
Wait a minute, was that the episode you guys were on in the podcast for Rock? Wasn't that the one, or no? Were you guys on that?
That was a week before us.
Oh, that's
Steve.
okay.
That's right.
Steve,
Classics.
you've seen Sammy in concert like 3-4 times.
I saw him solo on, what was it? The Mas Tequila album that had Mas Tequila.
Right.
I saw him with Chicken Foot and
That was a great band,
and saw him
Chicken Foot.
on the Sam and Dave tour.
Okay.
So,
Ooh,
but
that Chicken Foot, I loved those two albums.
Yeah. It's a shame. Sammy still recorded new music, and God bless him for doing so. Why he couldn't, and so was Joe Satriani. Why he couldn't continue with Chicken Foot?
It seemed like it would have been Chad Smith with the Chili Peppers.
Yeah. I know Kenny Aronoff filled in there, but
Right.
I was just thinking back to, when Sammy was at his peak as a solo artist, right before he got into Van Halen. I loved all the singles. I loved "I'll Fall in Love Again." I loved the song from the heavy metal soundtrack. I no longer need to ever hear I Can't Drive 55 ever again. But at the time, I'm like, that's a great song. Loved all the singles.
Yep. Those last three solo albums he did right up and before he joined Van Halen are really good, man. Those last three. Yeah.
But at the time, oddly enough, and I was buying albums. I never really gravitated buying the albums, but I really did. I grudgingly had to give it up because I was so in the Dave camp and wasn't too crazy about 5150, primarily because of the sound and just that and Alex's drum sound. It just wasn't heavy. It's just, I wanted something to sound the way 1984 did, or later. I think my favorite Sammy record, Van Halen, is For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, and I rediscovered Balance, which I think is a really
Underrated.
good record.
Yep.
I absolutely love Humans Being. It's one of my favorite Van Halen songs. Just love it's so damn powerful.
And that was an exciting time. Like, okay, Van Halen's back on track here. We're heading somewhere really cool. And then all of a sudden everything just imploded and Sammy was out.
And his solo work, I applaud any veteran artist that's still creating and making great and making music, whether it's good or not. That's to be seen. But I like a lot of his solo stuff I have most of the albums post Van Halen. So, Sammy's an odd one outside the singles. It's tough with his solo stuff to just go, oh yeah, this deeper track I really dig. But that's just the way my mind works with him. I think I'm not sure why that is. Where for me it was originally always about the singles, but as a solo artist, I've learned to appreciate him a lot more through the years.
Yeah, he had his first solid, complete album, in my opinion. I think most agree with Standing Hampton, 1982.
Right.
And then VOA, again, another solid start to finish. Three Lock Box came before VOA. That's another one.
And I can't forget it's not a solo album, of course, but so many of us found out about Sammy first before we even knew who he was through Montrose.
Oh, that first album.
That record. I mean, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
it still holds up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I Never Say Goodbye while Sammy was in Van Halen, the one where Eddie plays bass, is a great album. Yeah. Yeah,
with
Crazy
all the
Times.
robot musicians in the music video.
Oh, the video, yeah. So Darren, what are some of your picks from Sammy solo Van Halen years?
I'm 100% with Steve. I like the singles of Sammy. I can't listen to a full album, but he's also written songs for other people outside of his albums. You know, Rick Springfield. That is a hell of a song that holds up after all this time.
Oh, I've done everything for you. You talking?
Oh.
Yeah, that's great. He and Jesse Harms wrote a song for Heart that's an album, a deep track. And Sammy's kind of one of those people like Bryan Adams where you don't realize all the stuff that he did until you look at his ASCAP or BMI page of all that stuff. You know, for example, Bryan Adams co-writing War Machine by Kiss.
From Kiss, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Which I just heard recently he forgot that he even wrote that.
Yes.
He forgot.
Yeah. So I think that Sammy's done a lot more than he gets credit for. And when the wife and I saw him back in March in Vegas, and it was basically the hits minus Dreams, because I don't think anyone could sing Dreams that high into their 70s, and one Chicken Foot song, and that was the show. And there's not a lot of artists that can do a 2.5 hour show, and every song was a hit or a single.
Best Dave era Van Halen album and best Dave solo album. Start with Darren.
Well, Sonrisa Salva. No, I'm kidding.
Here he goes again, Steve. I'm telling you, he has a problem. He needs help.
I go back
and by the way, for the record, everybody, Darren has 3 copies of Skyscraper. Is it on vinyl?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I did not realize it. I was intoxicated. It was eBay.
I'm still waiting for my copy.
If you need one, Eric, you'll get it.
So anyway, yeah. So best Dave Van Halen era, best solo Dave album. What do you think?
I go back and forth as to whether Skyscraper or Eat 'Em and Smile is the best one, because they're totally different albums sonically, songwriting wise. There's no covers on Skyscraper, whereas are there 3 covers on Eat 'Em and Smile? I'm Easy.
Tobacco Road, I'm Easy, and That's Life.
Yep.
Yeah, and technically, if you want to say the Billy Sheehan song is a cover because he did it with Talus.
Sure.
But it's a shorter album and there's covers, but it's raw, whereas Skyscraper is digital. It's futuristic 80s in a good way and more keyboardy. So right now I'm more about Skyscraper personally. And my favorite Dave album, not sonically, but the songs, I'm a Van Halen 2 guy, but sonically it's Van Halen 1. What about you, Steve?
Van Halen, I'll tell you, Van Halen 1 stands out so strong. I have to be reminded how great Van Halen 2 is sometimes, and that takes the lead off. And I also love Fair Warning so much too. Solo stuff wise, this is going to sound really, how do I say this? I have probably listened to.
Say your filthy little mouth.
No, God, no.
Okay, good.
no. But I will say, probably it's a weird thing.
I would have shut the Zoom session down.
I'm out. Goodbye. No, Eat 'Em and Smile is just amazing. That's probably right up there, number 1 with me. It's easy to say Skyscraper's number 2, but you know what? I go back to probably more the last like 5 or 10 years. I go back to A Little Ain't Enough a lot.
You've talked about that
a lot. I would say that at any given time, that could be my second favorite record, with the exception of Baby on Fire and that virtual cover of Black Velvet. To me, I love Bob Rock's production. Jason Becker, Drop in the Bucket's one of my top 5. We talked about this on the podcast a couple years ago. That's one of the best Dave songs in his entire catalog. And in my opinion, it's a fun record. I mean, who the hell writes a song called Shooting Shark? I mean, that's Blue Oyster Cult. Hammerhead Shark.
Yeah.
Who writes a song called I'll Be Your Hammerhead Shark? I mean,
yeah.
Right. And A Little Ain't Enough, that's just a quintessential Dave. That song should have been massive. He should still be playing that every night.
Sensible Shoes.
Sensible Shoes. Yeah.
Cool
It's
tune.
Steve Hunter's on that record. You got the Bissonette Brothers as the entire rhythm section. So that record I go back to a lot. It's very underappreciated in my book.
I
An
love.
interesting thing, if I can add about a little lane enough, that people don't talk about with Dave is that so many of those songs were written by outside writers. Dave took the song and then, quote unquote, co-wrote them.
Robbie Neville.
Yeah.
Yeah, Robbie Neville had two. Dan Navarro, who I think is Dave Navarro's cousin, weirdly.
Hmm.
I forget what his band's called, but
Craig Goldie.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's got these interesting outside writers, and that Dave A&R'd that record. No one really talks about that. That's a really cool thing where he went, I like that song. Let's do that song.
Yeah.
That song. So it shows a talent that we don't hear on the prior two records.
Dogtown Shuffle.
Oh,
Yeah.
That really cool dark opening.
yeah.
Yeah. David liked to do the fun stuff with his voice. He's
And you know what? That was a harbinger to what stuff he did later on.
right.
And a lot of that crazy background stuff that we heard on a different kind of truth, and his later solo stuff where it was, those are vocals back there. What the hell's going on over there?
Yeah, cool. I've got to go with just the 1984 is just encompasses all of the Dave era, I think, because it's got the hits, but it's also got the Hard Rockers, House of Pain, and Drop Dead Legs, and Girl Gone Bad. But you mix in, I'm a sucker for a great pop rock song, so I still love Jump.
Yeah. How can you
I
not?
still love Jump. And I do had the first Dave album I ever bought was Skyscraper. Going to Fenway Park with my older brother, bought the cassette at a record store there right down the road from Fenway, and just looking at that cover of him on the side of the mountain and Just Like Paradise I love. So I do have a soft spot for Skyscraper. I think objectively I feel like I should say Eat 'Em and Smile, but I love Skyscraper.
I do. I do too. Damn good. Hot Dog and a Shake is some of his most hilarious lyrics.
Yeah. The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Just yesterday, I saw Joe Satriani. We put this up on the Van Halen news desk. He did add some more information about this Van Halen tribute that was supposed to happen with Satch, Alex Van Halen, and Dave, and who knows on bass. Jason Newsted was the one who really broke the story, and it blew up after that. But so Satriani said that Dave and Al wanted to put on a show in New York in August of 2021. What are your thoughts on
part of the We Love NYC,
Yes.
We Love New York homecoming concert?
And he almost hinted at it as like a kickoff to a tour almost. What do you think about that?
The thing that I just sat there flabbergasted about is when he said the show was almost 3 weeks away. You get a call out of the blue from Alex Van. He did say, I get a call out of the blue from Alex Van Halen, who I'd never met until then, saying, what do you basically, let's do this. I believe Satriani is being honest, but I'm incredulous that that's how something like this could even possibly come close to happening.
Can I now do a role reversal, Steve?
Please.
Here we go.
Okay. The reason I entirely believe that is because this was that Clive Davis concert. And Clive Davis did like a Wayne's World 2 thing where they said yes to the event before they knew what the talent was. And
Right.
Clive Davis was doing his Trump style, like, oh, it's going to be huge. It's going to be massive. Who's going to play it? Who do we got? He was doing that. So I have to think that Clive Davis was going, oh, it's record numbers. The pre-sales are huge. Who's playing it? Van Halen, Fleetwood Mac. I think that's what happened, because I remember there was an early news story after they announced the concert that it was like turned down by Springsteen and all of Clive Davis's quote unquote close friends, and they were struggling to get a headliner.
So here's a question. I'm always just so mixed up with the timeline. I really need to write all this stuff down more. But Satriani said that he later went down. He didn't know who the bass player was when he gets a phone call from Alex. He later goes down and meets Alex in LA. Is that when he finds out that Jason Newsted's standing there? And is that when they did their jam?
He doesn't say anything about that.
Right. In the article, he doesn't say that. But previously, we know that they jammed, right?
Well, he was invited to jam, I think was the way he worded it, right?
Yes.
Oh, I'm trying to remember now. Or was Jason Newsted the one that was invited to jam? I can't recall now. Which
I thought
one?
it was Jason Newsted was invited to jam. And I don't think that Satch had learned the songs. He just said yes.
But see,
And-
now what?
And if I can interject a little bit, from speaking to a lot of different people who've known Dave or worked with Dave, Dave doesn't rehearse. Dave doesn't sound check. Dave just kind of shows
Band
up.
rehearses.
Yeah, exactly. The band rehearses. And Alex, we always saw the videos of Alex, Eddie, and Michael Anthony sound checking, sometimes instrumental. So there's so many questions that come to that, except if there was a rehearsal, I don't think Dave was there.
Does this shoot down the theory then that Dave is the one that was holding it up and may still be holding this whole tribute up? Because this is basically saying he was ready. Is that why he was maybe putting out those recordings of the Van Halen classics with his solo band to try to tell us, guys, I'm here, I'm ready? He did those in May.
Trying to think of how I can say this. I still believe that Dave leaked those studio recordings as a countermeasure to the Rolling Stone article and the Wolfgang tribute. I still think that was that. The people that I speak to say that Dave just wanted to track with the band from the Vegas gigs because the Vegas gigs didn't happen and they were prepared, and he was kind of like wanted to have a time capsule of that. And I think somewhere out of some hat came the idea of, oh, we could put these out. In other words, I don't think that these were initially meant for public consumption. It just happened that way.
Well, okay.
No, that
some people were
sounds
saying he
nuts.
put those out to basically say, I'm not sick, I'm not dying, I'm fine, here I am.
The thing that frustrated me about that is that this was on the heels of putting out 5 songs that nobody had ever heard before from the John 5 sessions, as we've
Which are
been
really
calling
cool too. I like
which
it.
are really cool and really different. And if you're going to blunt that Rolling Stone article, I think it's a better move to put out stuff that no one's heard before. That instant automatically is not going to be compared to what you built your legend on.
Yeah.
I mean, he put out Van Halen cover songs. No one's gone back and listened to those things more than twice.
I'm with you. And people I know who have been around those sessions, they're not psyched about them either. So
Yeah.
So many questions. And I think that's the constant thing, that here we are more than 2 years after Eddie's death, and we still don't know anything. We don't know what's in the archives. We don't know if we're ever going to get a tribute. We don't know what's going to happen. And
but what do you think Joe Satriani meant too about, he said something interesting here. He said, I think there's some internal stuff that needs to get worked out with the family and then the Van Halen band family, which is kind of big. What does that mean?
Sound a little cryptic there.
the Van Halen band family would mean Azoff.
Dave. Oh.
And Dave's. Okay, so you take a band like Motley Crue, and it's like, yeah, Alan Kovac manages Motley Crue, and probably Nikki Sixx and stuff. But Tommy Lee has his own manager, and Vince Neil has his own manager, and Mick Mars has his own manager, and they probably have separate accountants as well. So something like that's going to be complicated. If we go to Van Halen, there's the Azoff stuff. There's whoever Dave is working with. Michael Anthony presumably has his own people as well. Then you have
Dave isn't managed by Azoff directly?
No.
I thought he was for a minute.
Not as far as I know. Dave has been self-managed since he parted ways with Angelus, and whoever his assistant is, he calls his manager, but his accountant, Jerry Leonard, is his manager.
Of course.
Yes, and you don't mess with Jerry. Jerry is in the background of that Fox News video where they spotted him at LAX airport. I only say that because one or two people went, and Dave's assistant or Dave's intern, blah, blah, nope, that's his manager.
Has there ever been a band that has had so little regard and so little attention by them and their management paid to their legacy, their musical output, their catalog? I mean, think of this. If they did even a quarter or half of what Kiss has officially done during the same time period, the three of us would be talking about how excited we were to get that Skyscraper home concert video
Yeah.
with multiple cameras and backstage shit, and then the soundboard recordings from whatever. I mean, just think of it.
It's always a mystery. Let's promote the show, websites, whatever, your social media. You guys have at it. Well, I guess we'll start with Steve. Any websites, social media pages you want to let people know about?
I mean, just my own on Facebook, but you can find the DLRcast on Twitter, and we're on your favorite podcast providers. And I mean, outside of that, it's all about the podcast for the most part.
Yep. Darren?
Today I put up 3 articles on paltrowcast.com. One with a Korean boy band. The hell that I had in getting that interview out into the world, that's almost a book into itself.
Yeah.
2 from these actors from this Hulu movie called The Binge 2 that is about to come out this week. But long story short, just put Darren Paltrowitz or Paltrowcast into the Google machine or YouTube, and you'll see me talking to a lot of people. Sometimes they're actors, athletes, whatever it is. But we try and put David Lee Roth into as many of these interviews as possible and lead to horrible clickbait.
Forever on the hunt for David Lee Roth news.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Thanks for having us, Eric.
Yeah, it's fun. Thanks.
You've been so supportive. Nothing but yeah.
Well, now, that was an adventure.
That was quite a show you put on today.
Well, let me just close this conversation by saying you are one unique individual.